It's that time again. Another flipped video lesson with me, Mr. Volkman. The previous flip video for 21.8a had to do with debates, specifically between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen A. Douglas, as they duked it out to figure out who would be senator for Illinois. The second half of the 21.8 flipped video lessons, which is B, has to do with dun 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 death. Let's begin. Abolitionists, for the most part, were not very violent. They were a group of people who wanted to use persuasive arguments and facts and details to prove to their point that slavery was an evil. However, after the Kansas-Nebraska Act, this changed. And it changed in a very dramatic way. For example, think of what John Brown did after people from Missouri came and attacked Lawrence, Kansas. So the mid-1850s saw this shift from a mostly peaceful group of abolitionists to seeing some abolitionists who were not afraid to get their hands dirty, so to speak. And that is what this flip video is about. And it's going to focus on a very specific and very violent event known as the Harpers Ferry Raid. Let's talk about the plan, because every good raid has to start with a plan. Now, John Brown's plan was to first capture the federal arsenal at Harpers Ferry, Virginia, which is now in West Virginia. What he wanted to do is he wanted to arm slaves in the countryside to help them rise up against their masters and strike them down. His long-range goal was a little bit more, how do we say, crazy? For he wanted to drive southward into Tennessee and Alabama. And along the way, he wanted to raid the federal arsenals on his way down to those states. And he wanted to incite slave rebellions or slave insurrections. If we look at a map, here's Harper's Ferry right now. He wanted to go all the way down into Tennessee, then all the way into Alabama. And again, along the way, raiding these federal arsenals, getting weapons, and then giving those weapons to slaves so they could rise up and rid themselves of their cruel masters. Now that they had the plan, they had to execute that plan. So on October 16th, 1959, in the evening, the first moments of John Brown's Harper Ferry Raid began. Brown and 21 men captured the lone night watchman. They then cut the town's telegraph lines, because that way then they can't radio in for help. And of course, they didn't get any resistance. They were able to seize the federal arsenal, an armory, and a rifle works, along with several $1 million worth of arms and munitions. And I'm really certain at this point in time, John Brown and all his men who were with him were thinking, this is easy. Wow. Well, don't put the cart before the horse, or count your chickens before they hatch. So far, everything's going great for John Brown and his men. They've captured the armory, they have weapons, they have ammunition, they've cut the lines so that they can't radio, because they didn't have radios, telegraph out for help. Everything's going great. So they began phase 2, which was sending men out to capture hostages and to free slaves and get them to join the insurrection, to give them weapons. However, this is when problems start to happen, because a church bell begins to ring. I know I don't have a church bell, so I can't ring it for you, but just picture in your ears a church bell ringing, warning farmers in the area, warning militiamen that a slave uprising, a slave insurrection is underway. Remember Nat Turner's rebellion? I am sure, almost positive, that the slave owners are worried and they're thinking about it and going, oh no, it's happening here. Unfortunately for John Brown and his men, they end up getting trapped in a building. And when they tried to get out of the building under a white flag of truce, "Don't hurt us, don't hurt us," the crowd would fire at them. So John Brown and his men now are finding themselves trapped. Phase 2 is not going nearly as good as Phase 1. Now, so far, things aren't going too well for John Brown and his men. However, you might think it could get better. It's just a crowd of angry farmers and militiamen. However, the tide starts turning early Tuesday morning, October 18th, so about a day and a half later, when U.S. Marines, commanded by Colonel Robert E. Lee, arrived at Harpers Ferry. Somehow, Brown and his men are able to take refuge in a fire engine house. They're able to get holes, make holes into the brick, stick their rifles in there, and boom! Fire at the Marines. What do you think is going to end up happening? Now, a hostage who was in the firehouse recounted this moment. "With one son dead by his side and another shot through, he, John Brown, felt the pulse of his dying son with one hand and held his rifle with the other and commanded his men, encouraging them to fire and sell their lives as dearly as they could." Now you tell me, what would you do in this situation? Could you do what John Brown supposedly just said and did? As his sons are dying by his side, he's encouraging other men to die and fight. Surely they cannot beat the Marines. Who do you think's crazier at this point? Nat Turner or John Brown? They both went on a suicide mission, didn't they? Well, Harper's Ferry aftermath. Because you know, he's going to get caught. Eventually, 5 of John Brown's party escaped and got free. And there's some interesting articles in different history magazines that talk about some of these men. One of them wasn't actually a freed slave who ended up helping John Brown, ended up running away, and he lived a life. 10 of John Brown's men were killed. 7 of John Brown's men were actually captured and taken prisoner. John Brown was one of them. In fact, John Brown was hung for treason and for murder. So what were some consequences of Harper's Ferry, other than, people dying? Well, people in the North rallied under John Brown. Finally, here was a man who would stand up to the evil of slavery and do what needed to be done. The people in the South, well, they felt that this incident showed what the North would do to free slaves. Would they be willing to go to free slaves? And it scared Southerners. And I'm sure a lot of them felt as though secession or leaving the country might be the way to go. Well, thank you for watching this flipped video. I did ask you a question about who you thought was the craziest, Nat Turner or John Brown. And I will post that question on Edmodo with the link to this video. And I will put this as extra credit. I haven't done one in a while. So please answer that question. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. There'll also be some homework questions on Edmodo. But hey, I'll see you in class.